what we have here is a king oyster mushroom, okay? These are the creme de la creme of gourmet mushrooms that you can grow yourself. These are deemed by many, many people as the best tasting gourmet mushroom that you can cultivate, okay? It's absolutely my #1 favorite to eat, and we're gonna show you how to try and create an amazing bunch of king oysters. So king oyster mushroom, also known as the king brown mushroom, Pleurotus orangii, is in the family of oyster mushrooms. It's related to all the common oyster mushrooms that we're growing, except it grows in a very, very different way. You can see here, we just pull this bag down, that it's got these great big stems, okay? So this is very different from regular oyster mushrooms where you're trying to avoid stems at all costs. In a regular oyster, if it gets a long skinny stem, that's gonna be really, really chewy. Whereas in the king oyster mushrooms, it's the most succulent, perfect thing you can eat. Okay, so these are grown for their stems, and the way we cultivate them is gonna enhance that stem, okay? That's why it's top fruiting out of the bag here. So we'll come to picking these mushrooms in a moment, but if we focus back down onto a block of king oyster here, so this block here is 3 weeks old, and we keep these blocks incubating from the time we inoculate them to the time we put them in the fruiting room, 3 weeks. And that's gonna get this block really nice and white and ready to fruit. So once your block looks something like this, you're gonna wanna expose it so that it can start to fruit. So for a king oyster mushroom, that involves cutting the top off the bag. So we'll snip this top straight off like this. And this is really, really important, okay? If we cut it right down at the surface level here, you're not gonna get a bunch of mushrooms that look something like this. And that's because what's actually going on here is we're creating a sink of carbon dioxide. As we know, mushrooms produce CO2, and what's going on here is as the mushrooms produce CO2, CO2 is heavier than air and actually wells up in this bag like this. Now, mushrooms don't like CO2, so they're gonna try and search to try and find the oxygen. And what these king oysters are actually doing is searching up through the bag, growing their stems taller to try and get away from the carbon dioxide. So we're utilizing what the mushrooms are trying to do to our advantage here. So by having your top fruited bag like this, you're gonna get a much, much better bunch of mushrooms. Once you've got your bag looking something like this, you're gonna want to do something that's called kinkoki, okay? It's a Japanese term, and it means to scrape away the top surface layer of the mushroom. So on the substrate here, with a fork, scrape away. Don't be shy. If large pieces of substrate fall off, that's absolutely fine. Okay, these are mushrooms. They're gonna want a fruit. It's not gonna stop them. So once you've gotten a nice scrape on, that's what you want to be looking for. And this is going to initiate a pin set, or the primordia king oysters are going to grow up through this scraping, okay? So if you didn't scrape the top surface of your bag for king oysters, you will grow some king oyster mushrooms, but it's just nowhere near going to get a bigger pin set than you normally would, okay? So this is stimulating the fruiting process to begin. After a week or so of your mushroom bag looking something like this, you jump over to this bag here, we can see little tiny king oyster mushrooms. Okay, now these guys are perfect. They're growing up, and within a week or so, they'll be as big as these ones over here. So these little primordia mushrooms are growing up, and you need to be providing enough humidity to try and keep them growing. Okay, you do not want to let these blocks dry out. The thing about king oyster mushrooms is they're a cold weather mushroom. So if you're living in a warm climate, you're really going to struggle in trying to be able to grow these types of mushrooms. So you want to be trying to find a temperature range of between 15 and 21 degrees. And if you're not providing some sort of artificial cooling in place, this might be difficult, and it's going to be really, really hard to stimulate the pin set to form. But if you've got the cold temperatures, these guys are the way forward. So after a week or so, you're going to be left with a great big bunch of king oyster mushrooms. And you're going to have the plastic up around the top just like that. And we slit it down the middle, pull it down, so it's going to make it a lot easier to harvest those mushrooms. Okay. Now, when you're harvesting king oysters, you want to try and get the most out of the mushroom. You want to try and get the most stem. We spent all that time growing them, so let's try and keep those stems as long as possible. What this means is you should just pull away the bunches of mushrooms as you're growing them. So if we find a nice bunch on the side here, and we just use our hands, we pull it away like this, okay? If we pull the mushroom bunch away, you're gonna be left with some substrate on the bottom. And all you do with your knife is you just trim that straight off. So we'll just trim it off, really easy. That way you're gonna get the most stem as possible out of your bunch of king oyster mushrooms, okay? And then it's very, very easy. You can just separate them very cleanly by pulling them apart. That's the best way to harvest a king oyster block. By pulling away those mushrooms one by one in clumps, you're going to be not leaving any stem butts like this on the surface. So if you left stem butts like this on the surface, it's not going to initiate another pin set to form. It's going to be blocking any primordia that want to grow. So by pulling the mushrooms away, you're exposing the substrate again, just like we're doing over here. It's now exposed again, and you're going to initiate a new pin set on this bunch of king oysters, and then it's going to keep fruiting 2-3 times, okay? King oyster mushrooms, they hold their shape really well when you fry them. You can slice them straight down the middle. That's why chefs absolutely love them, and they're our #1 selling mushroom here at Little Acre. So the king oyster mushrooms, or king brown, Pleurotus orangii, really recommend you give it a go if you've got some cool temperatures, if it's winter, or if you're able to provide some cooling to try and initiate these pins to form. You're going to absolutely get some amazing mushrooms just like this. So give this guy a go if you can.